Hi, everyone. We have a lot of people signed up for the webinar today, and we're probably about halfway there. I'm just going to give people a couple more minutes to come in. So if you can wait patiently for a few, and also if anyone's having any issues, you can get with Sherry to try to iron those out. So hold on just a minute. Also, I should have mentioned there's a quick poll up. If you get a chance to answer that, I will mention that partway through, and it looks like we're getting a bunch of responses already. And we're already at the 20-person mark, so we should have everybody, I think, that's coming in here in just a minute or two. Okay, we're a minute or two after, so I'll go ahead and get started. We'll probably have some people that still come in, and I haven't done a poll that carried over into the presentation, so we'll see how that goes. But just if you're curious, how many people are attending from someplace other than their actual business office, just under 90% are away. So that is interesting, and I'll double check that to make sure to see how many responses we're getting. It just shows me a percentage at first. But it looks like quite a few people have responded. So as an introduction, if you have not heard of DWD Technology Group, welcome. If you are coming in because of a referral from the CPA side, and we're not even aware that we had a technology side, welcome to you as well. My name is Pete Amborn. I'm manager of the network group. This is my 6th year here at DWD, and we do primarily managed services, still quite a bit of break fix work, which is old school. You have a problem, we fix it kind of thing, and pretty much everything in between. We have a staff of 7 engineers that are fantastic, and a software side that kind of doubles that number. And then if you double that number, including the CPA group, that gives us, I think, somewhere approaching 70 at this point. So fairly large and growing, which is good. And our poll is at 90%. And that is, people attending remotely. So not totally surprising. Kind of thought it would go that way. I'll jump right in. The plan is I'm going to speak for somewhere around 25, 30 minutes. Everybody is muted, which is pretty typical, but especially when we have a bunch of members, it's next to impossible to watch the chat at the same time. If you open that up, tons of people will throw things out there and will just confuse me. So I will kind of go through what I have, and then I'll be more than happy to hang around for quite a while afterwards. If you do enter some things in the chat, I'll try to hit those then. If you want to wait and chat at the end, that's fine as well. My email was up on the previous screen. It will be up again on the last screen. Also, the recorded webinar will go online probably within a few days. So no one will miss out. Don't feel like you have to write a bunch of stuff down. You will have access to the slide deck at some point as well. So IT security and the new norm. And we consider this, from our standpoint, as starting somewhere around March or so is when businesses started calling us and asking how they can get their workers working remotely. No surprise at this point. The number one thing that we kept getting asked about was Zoom, and I'm sure everybody has heard about that. Great for Zoom. Last thing I saw, I think they were up 169% year to year, which is fantastic. The downside is they became the number one target for the bad guys. No big surprise there. But one of the biggest things that came out immediately was what they call Zoom bombing. Okay, Sherry's telling me the poll's still showing, so we're going to close that just to get it out of the way. Hopefully everybody can see that. You didn't miss much. The first screen is up there, and I apologize, I didn't realize the poll would actually obscure everything. So back to Zoom. Zoom bombing. If you have kids in school, you may have heard about this. That's kind of where it started. Students are not very secretive. Some of them do it intentionally, giving out meeting IDs and passwords to other people that sometimes just for fun, just to be mean, whatever, will come in and interrupt a meeting, start blaring music, start shouting all kinds of fun stuff, changing the screen, taking control of the screen, and teachers not being familiar with using the remote control stuff like this before would just have to end the meeting until they figured out a way to lock it down. Kind of funny at that point. But when you start talking about it for businesses, then it's not so funny anymore, especially when people come in and do things like secretly record meetings where the information should not go any further than the participants that were actually invited. On top of that, what a lot of people don't realize is by default, like this meeting you're in right now, which is a WebEx, not a Zoom or a Teams or, I'm sorry, it's a GoToMeeting, not any of the first three you see at the top. If I wasn't paying attention and was new to this service, I wouldn't have noticed that when I started the broadcast, under it was a tiny checkbox that was automatically checked that said automatically record. That's great. That's not a big deal. But knowing where those recordings go and keeping those locked down if they have some kind of confidential information obviously needs to be a priority. So it pays to know the things on the left you're going to see listed are some risks, and the things on the right are going to be some tips. So the very first thing is check and disable features. Probably should have renamed that become familiar with the tool you're using. Zoom is huge. Most of you have probably used it, if nothing else, on the personal level. We're big Microsoft Teams users. WebEx is one of the biggies, GoToMeeting. Tons of them out there. Whichever one you pick, hopefully pick one that's very secure and offers a bunch of the nicer features. Become familiar with the features. Know what you're doing. One of the first things you want to do is make sure that only the host can present their screen. If we're in something like Teams, Teams is awesome. We use that within our company, and one of the powers of it is anyone in the meeting, unless we change it, can share their screen. And obviously we trust everyone on when and how that's going to happen. You don't want to do that when you're inviting people into something like this, webinars from outside, because if somebody can sneak in and then all of a sudden start sharing their screen, who knows what they're going to put up. Not going to be a good thing. Waiting rooms are also very popular. If you're on this webinar, you've probably been on others. You've probably been in a waiting room, and the host has to admit you. That's actually a pretty powerful thing. Only if you're very, very certain that the only people that are coming into your webinar are people that you want, then you don't have to bother using a waiting room. Otherwise, a waiting room is a really good idea, especially during the presentation. I found out that a lot of the people trying to sneak into meetings wait until after they've started. So if you have a meeting with 20, 30 people, it's not as obvious when someone jumps in late. They can kind of creep in and just listen. The other thing is, it's a pain, but use passwords. So if you're having a meeting that's going to have confidential information, have some kind of password or access code that people have to get into that. That way, just random people that somehow got an invite or somehow got a link or created it themselves to get into your meeting can't get in without that access key or password. So fantastic tools, just know what you're using. Something else that's really interesting that kind of shocked me when it first came up when someone called and asked me about it was conference calling. Lots of people do just conference calls and not the whole video route. So freeconferencecall.com is a very popular one, and it absolutely has a free version. If you're going to use it, or if you are using it, I encourage you to go with their paid version. It's going to give you some bonuses here to better secure you. Here's some of the risks. Random dialing. There are programs out there you can download for free that will just random dial phone numbers until somebody answers and you try to get in. So no big surprise, hackers out there know which blocks services like free conference call use, which blocks of phone numbers. And that may be a huge block of numbers, but it doesn't matter if it's the computer doing the dialing. They just set that thing off and go, and it's going to keep dialing until it comes up with one that doesn't require a passcode. And here's another example that most people don't think about. If someone's email is hacked, and it doesn't have to necessarily even be yours, but let's say it's someone that you sent an invite to, their email is hacked, and as part of that, the hacker gets into their calendar. Any of those meetings and the meeting information, they now have access to. So it used to be, if you could think of it as the good old days, when somebody did get into your email, they would either delete messages or they would try to gain some access to info and then get out. They would try to disable it. They try to redirect, some very obvious things. Well, they're getting better now and smarter. And so now when they actually gain access to email, they sit and watch. And they're watching for any kind of information that comes through. They're the kind of man in the middle at that point. And one of the things they look for is interesting meetings, things that might have confidential data that are set up in your calendar. So some tips: use dedicated lines. And this doesn't mean you are using the dedicated lines. It's whatever service you're using uses dedicated lines. You have the same number all the time, and you can assign pins or access codes. That's important. If you're using the free block of phone numbers, then your phone number is going to change every time. And it's also phone numbers that the bad guys are pretty well aware of. Practice safe naming. This one's kind of funny, but I've read it in several places. And that has to do with your calendar. When you're naming meetings, you probably don't want to put something in there like board meeting, confidential data exchange, something along those lines. You don't have to get too cute with your naming and be so secretive that you don't even know what it is anymore. But just be aware that if somebody spotted a bunch of meetings on your calendar and a bunch of conference calls, things like that, if you have one that's obviously labeled that with something that's going to be confidential, that's the first one they're going to try to get into. And just like with the video, use a waiting room and use pins or access codes whenever possible. So working from home, and I probably should have relabeled this. It's not a matter of if, but when. I'm betting probably 100% of you have somebody, 89% of the people in here already, even the other percentage have somebody that's working remotely, maybe at home, maybe from a temporary office, maybe they're on the road, wherever that is. Some of the risks that go along with that, and I'm not going to get too technical here. If you want the technical information, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation about that. I'll just hit some of the high points. Lots of businesses that started to read right away, you need a VPN, a virtual private network. You need to secure your business. And so they asked whoever was working on their IT, do we have a VPN? If so, enable it. Problem solved. Well, there are lots of ways to configure those VPNs, and if they're not configured correctly, just because you have one doesn't mean you're completely protected. For example, somebody connecting from home, as soon as they connect and they have their username, they have their password, their VPN is connected. Their computer, if it's a home computer, is now part of your work network. So if that home computer has a virus, has malware, you've just given it a path to some of the things on your network. Now, hopefully the things on your business network are well protected with antivirus, anti-malware, and all that, but why take a chance? So a correctly configured VPN can actually be set to check whatever remote computer is connecting to the network. And if they don't have the right tools or they're not up to date, they don't get to connect. Very powerful tool. And I'll go a little bit more into that here in a little bit. Unencrypted laptops, That's another one. And then I wanted to find a picture of a laptop and a phone left unattended somewhere. This one's in a coffee shop. Person probably just stepped to the bathroom or whatever, and the worst way you possibly could. The screen is unlocked, computer is on. All somebody would have to do is grab that. Even if the computer was off or the screen was locked, if the hard drive is not encrypted, all you have to do is pull the hard drive out of that machine, hook it up somewhere else, and fairly easily, with some pretty easily obtainable tools, you can get data off of that hard drive. So a pretty simple step. Always check with somebody first, but a pretty simple step is encrypting hard drives, and then also making sure you don't have unsecured phones. And I know businesses, most of them, the phones are the employees' phones, but if they're using those phones for company email or some other form of conversation or data housing, then those things are your responsibility as well. So they need to be secured. How do you do all this? First of all, with the VPNs, make it mandatory that whatever computer is connecting has an up-to-date antivirus and anti-malware. In our case, we're going even further. We're going to make it mandatory that it be Sentinel-1. We just happen to think that's one of the strongest out there right now. And so no matter what computer someone's using to connect from, if it has Sentinel-1, that's up to date, we're pretty confident it's a clean machine. Something else that other people will not be able to set in their VPN, it just may not even have this feature. If it doesn't, that's good. But something called network pass-through. And what that means is I connect to the network here at the office from home. And if network pass-through is a feature and it's enabled, then not only my computer at home is connected to the network, but everything behind the computer is connected. So Alexa, anything else I have, kids' computers, whatever else in the house is now part of the network. And this used to be considered a big plus because it would allow you to kind of do a site-to-site VPN, but one of the ends is actually a computer instead of a firewall. Sounds awesome until you don't know that it's doing it, and you aren't aware of it and you don't want it. So one thing to have your IT person check is to see if you have network pass-through and to make sure that's disabled. Rarely do you want to have that enabled. Encrypt laptops and require pins on phones. And this is interesting. Even if you're running Exchange server on your local network at your business, you can require a pin on the phones. You can make it mandatory that they have it, so that when one of your users picks up even their personal phone, goes to install the or configure the email, a message will pop up saying, that's fine, but you're agreeing that you must have a PIN, and it'll send them to settings on the phone to enable that. And they don't get in until they enable it. So very cool feature. If you want some more information on that, let me know. And I'll move in here and move on. Cloud storage. This is actually pretty interesting as well. I think it surprises a lot of people. If you were to walk around your office, you might be surprised to find some things running on there that's not company approved. So some of the items listed here, I'm betting everyone has heard of OneDrive, Box, Dropbox, iCloud, if you're an iPhone or Mac user. iDrive was one of the first biggies. I'm familiar with all of those. Some of the other ones I'm not, but I understand lots of people use them. And a couple things about them make them kind of scary. First of all, they're easy. They're convenient, and they're fast. They're pretty simple to use. That's all great, but it also means it's very easy for your end users to put those on company computers when they're not approved. One of the easiest ways to get around users doing this, because they'll want to do it. It's convenient. It's great. They have a file. They just know they're going to want to hit later. They're not sure from where. It's just very quick and easy to throw that in Dropbox. They know they've got it. I'll remember to go delete it later. Sure. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But now all of a sudden you've got company data that's out here on a service that you had no idea was even out there. So number one hint or tip here is know what's on your network. That sounds easy. It can be, I guess, in practice, it can be easy, but it is kind of time consuming. If you don't have any software or anything on your network that is constantly scanning. This may actually require just every once in a while someone walking around and see what people are running. If you see the icons down on the taskbar for Dropbox or OneDrive, or you go into File Manager and those are options, then you know somebody's running something they shouldn't be, so you have to take it off. And here's a very interesting screen. For those of you that already are using Office 365, you're probably used to this. But back in February 2019, I think it was February, Microsoft made a huge change. And I don't remember them even announcing it until after the fact. But if you were in Excel, Word, any of the Microsoft programs using through Office 365 and went to save, instead of the old default File Manager coming up to ask you if you want to save it to your documents and settings or whatever, all of a sudden it shifted to OneDrive was the default. And even more surprisingly, you couldn't change it. And I think to this day, it's still that way. So the default thing that comes up is OneDrive. So some of your users may have even started saving there, may still be, and didn't even realize it. Or they see OneDrive and all of a sudden they found out how awesomely easy that is. And they figured, well, it's here, it's on my business computer, it must be okay. So they started using it that way. So just something to be aware of. It doesn't necessarily have to be an actual service installed on the computer. It could be running right through their saves. And along those same lines, and the hints I'm going to give here are exactly the same. Know what is on your network. And just like with the cloud storage, the remote desktop apps are very easy, very fast, and there are plenty of free ones out there, which makes for a scary combination. Remote desktop software is something like, if you haven't seen it or heard of it, TeamViewer, LogMeIn are the two biggies. I know Splashtop is coming on pretty strong lately. It allows you to control a computer remotely from home or anywhere else. So you literally take it over. The downside, unlike remote desktop on a server, is it's one-to-one. So if you're taking over that computer at work, no one else can sit there and work on it. And that's kind of a downside. This was probably our number one thing other than the meetings, the online meetings. So yeah, actually, this may have even been higher up than the online meetings. It was, how do I get my users access to their computer at work? And TeamViewer, LogMeIn, both excellent at what they do. TeamViewer, I don't know about LogMeIn, but TeamViewer's actually had to switch here recently because they had such high use. So they limit people that are on their free version to, I think it's 3 hours a day. And so you have to go to their paid version. The paid version also offers some additional security benefits. And one of the things you might want to consider here, I'm skipping down because I'm running just a few minutes behind. Something you might want to consider instead of these is the built-in remote desktop, and it's built right into Windows. The kind of plus and minus of this is, the plus is it can be way more secure. The minus is it takes some configuration. So by default, even if you turn on remote desktop, it's going to be difficult to hit from outside because there's no app or anything, unlike with TeamViewer, LogMeIn, or some of the other ones where you have an app, you put in your email and password, and all of a sudden you can see your computer at work. Not so with this one. You have to have an IP address, and you may even have to have a port number in addition to the IP address. And that has to be configured at your office on the firewall to point to your workstation. The good news is that makes it a little bit harder to get to. And to make it even harder than that, you really need to require that somebody be connected to the VPN that hopefully you have set up now and configured correctly in order to get to any of the desktops. So that's the number one way to do it. I would recommend is use the remote desktop, but require a VPN connection to do it. And if you have questions on that, I'd be more than happy to answer them because we have lots of people doing that already. We do a little bit of that ourselves. And almost lastly here, moving to the cloud, and that might be everything on your network, or it might be maybe a piece of vertical software that you have run for years and years and years. What we're finding is, and this has happened in the last several months, all of a sudden, surprise, surprise, a lot of vendors are saying we're now on the cloud, although they had given no hints of this prior. which is kind of scary because it makes you think, did they go too fast? Did they put it out there before it's really ready? And then the second thing to worry about here before giving some things to look for, are you ready for it? And more importantly, are your users ready to move to these cloud versions? For people that have used QuickBooks in the past and used it for years on the desktop, and then QuickBooks came available online in the cloud, sounded awesome. The very first thing we heard was it's not the same. And it's not going to be the same. Rarely is it ever going to look the same and act the same as what you were running locally. That's not always a bad thing, but it's definitely something you want to check first. Just how different is it, and how good are your users at training, getting educated on it, and just personality-wise, how well do they accept change? Because that's important. The online services at the bottom that I have listed, the top half are Microsoft, the bottom half are all Google. And I didn't realize this till later. Microsoft Teams is listed twice on there. It's not that we just think it's so awesome. We thought we'd list it twice. That's just a mistake. So I apologize, but Teams is great. SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange Online, which we're not using yet, but we have lots of people that are using it. Microsoft Teams, there are O365 apps that are out there. All of these services are fantastic. That's one of the first things we want to say. We use them, they're great, but there are some gotchas. The number one thing that most people are not aware of is they operate on what's called a shared responsibility model. And I pulled that language straight out of the Microsoft contract. Shared responsibility model. That means they're responsible for their infrastructure, their servers, the switches, the firewalls, those impressive data centers that maybe you've seen on the news, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. They're phenomenal. They're great. It's amazing how they do it. They give you like 99.99% uptime. But the one thing you're responsible for are backups. So every once in a while, you'll hear someone say, there was a file accidentally deleted, and I was amazed that Microsoft doesn't just have different versions backed up. Why is that? That's not what they're responsible for. They're doing their job, which is the data center. It's up to you to have backups. The good news is there are services, plenty of them out there that do that. The one we kind of recommend and know the best is Datto. Used to be called Backupify. Datto bought that part of the service, and they do it, and they're relatively inexpensive. So ask whoever's in charge of your IT or helps you with that, whether or not all the services you use include backups or not. If they don't, you're absolutely going to want to have to, you're going to want to get something set up and going. And the last thing to throw in there is something that people I know aren't big fans of, but it's critical that you use this as much as possible. Multi-factor authentication. If it's possible at all, use it. Duo, Authy, Microsoft Authenticator, Google Authenticator, that's what those icons are for on the right. I know I have 3 of those on my phone just because different services I use different authenticators. It's kind of a pain at first to get them set up, but once they're set up, they're actually very easy to use. Some you can set to authenticate and keep you logged in basically all day. Some set it longer, but the longer you go, the riskier it is. Duo is the one we're most familiar with. We use it ourselves. It's probably the one most specific for businesses, and it's excellent, gives you lots of different options. And some of those are like the profiling that I mentioned earlier, where only people running certain software can connect. And got lots of information on multi-factor authentication for anybody that's interested as well. Now I'm going to go back to old school data control, and I'll zip through this fast because I realize we have the last few minutes here. Data control means file and folder access on your local network. That's how I'm using the term here. And how do I control that? And I know this webinar is all IT security and the new normal, but the new normal going forward is that stuff didn't go away. You're just giving access to it in different ways. So you still have folders and files on your servers, maybe a workstation that you need to make sure isn't going anywhere and is only accessed by people that should be getting into it. There's some really nice software, some really nice hardware software combos out there that will help you do data control. and they involve tracking and auditing. And that's kind of the downside, is the tracking and auditing, because that can get overwhelming in a hurry. The other downside to that is most of the time it means you're reacting to something. It's already happened. Cat's out of the bag. Yes, you found out somebody got in that shouldn't have and started pulling data and stuff. Well, at that point, it's too late. So unless you have some really good stuff that's super fast at alerting you and you have people that are ready to jump on it the second it happens, that's going to make it a little bit harder of a method to use to control all of the data. Here's a little bit easier one, I think. I won't say necessarily better, but I think it's a better fit. And password management is the general term. If any of you are LastPass users, you'll recognize this screen. I'm not trying to push any one product. LastPass just happens to be what we use internally. I think it's great. It also has a business focus and an enterprise focus, as well as a personal side. And you can actually combine those two. For people that want information, it's really cool. You can actually have a personal account and a business account, tie those two together. If you leave the company or if somebody else does, those can be pulled apart. You don't share information. It's very cool. But the power of a password management tool like this, just check out the screen that's up there right now. Let's say I'm on a site and I'm getting ready to set a password for the first time. Instead of trying to come up with my 124th different password, or please don't use the same password on all the sites. Instead of either of those options, let the software come up with a password. And you can customize it here on how long you want it or short. In this case, I think I just left the default when it came up. The password length is going to be 12 characters. And to the far right, I made sure it includes uppercase, lowercase, number, and symbol, which I think will probably just right there, you probably fit the requirements of just about every site. You can move that slider over. I think it may go to like 140 characters. It's something crazy. 12 is pretty good. And the first thing you'll probably think of is, how in the world am I going to remember that? Well, that's one of the huge benefits to the password management, is you don't have to. They don't expect you to. The password management software remembers it for you. So the only password you have to remember from that point going forward is the one to get into your password management tool. And in this case, it's like I said, it's LastPass. To take that even further, how would it benefit a business? Because what I just showed you is on the personal side or individual side, but in our case, I'll use us as an example. Let's just say we have a site like Cisco, which is where I pulled this one up, and we have an account that I'm getting ready to create, and I want all of the technicians to be able to use that, but I don't want them to know the password. So I can actually enter it here, put their email addresses in there. That invites them in LastPass. They have to be LastPass users. And then I can choose with that checkbox whether they even get to see the password. If I don't care, I'll check the box. I do care, and I'll get to the power of that in a second, so I don't check the box. So when they go into Cisco, LastPass is actually going to log in for them. And you can use it on any computer where you pull up a browser, log into LastPass, and then you're in, and you can go to any of your sites. Now, let's say, here's the real power of that is, or even makes it even more powerful, is someone leaves the company, whether they're fired, they quit, they move on, they change positions, whatever. For whatever reason, they no longer should have access to certain passwords, certain sites. All I have to do is remove them from this list. They never knew the password, so I don't have to worry about them having it written down in a logbook somewhere. I don't have to worry about them taking a screenshot of all their passwords just before they quit and move to a different company, let's say. They never had it to start with, which is pretty awesome. So here I'm going to wrap it up. I know we're pretty much out of time, and I'm not going to read all of these off to you because it's just a recap. We've pretty much talked about them, but I wanted you to be aware of the different areas. I can go into detail on any of these if you like, or if you think there's something I didn't hit and we're hoping to hear today, that would be good as well. But audio conferencing and video conferencing, those two kind of go hand in hand as far as what you need to do, requiring access codes, number one, for both of those. Connecting remote workers, can't say that enough. If you're not using a VPN already, you really need to be. If you need help with that, find out from your IT department or whoever's doing IT for you, the third party, what you need to do to get that VPN connection going. And that's the only connection to your network from the outside. Data leakage via cloud services, and this goes for whether it's remote control software or cloud sharing. Just know what's loaded on your network. Make it company policy. Hey, you're not allowed to load these things. Or if you have one you prefer and you have some guidelines, say, if you're going to use it, this is what you need to use. And when moving to the cloud, can't say it enough, have somebody check for you on whatever that offering is, how long it's been out there, how secure is it, are they backing up the data? What happens if that company goes away at some point? Where's my data? All of that stuff is going to be in contracts, but it also helps to have somebody with some IT knowledge look at it to see the, real world access. Because sometimes things that are in contracts of, don't worry, this will be available to you. When push comes to shove and it actually happens, all of a sudden the nuts and bolts of, okay, that's great. It says it should be available to me. How do I get to it? It's good to know that ahead of time. And with data control, you can do the data logging. That's fantastic. Just know that it can get overwhelming. We highly recommend instead password management tools. If you don't care for LastPass, I know 1Pass, the number 1 and then pass is also, or 1Password, I think it is also pretty popular. If you need recommendations for that or would just like to see some more details, let me know. We'd be glad to help you out. And out of breath, just to put it out there one more time, yep, double check. There's my email, and that's our main phone number for DWD Technology Group. And you will get a slide deck, copy of these, and access to the recording at some point. If you want to hang on for a few minutes, I'll thank everybody for showing up. And if people have questions, we'll try to zip through those. And by the way, the poll came out. I think 95% of the people responded, and it was no surprise, like 90% of the people were actually attending the meeting at 1 o'clock during the week from somewhere other than their normal office. So again, thanks everybody for your time today. I hope you were able to pull some valuable information out of there, or at least if nothing else, jot down some questions that you need to go ask somebody to make your environment a lot more secure. Because even though we had some good vaccine news this week, potentially from Pfizer, even when that becomes available, I think most people will agree things have changed permanently, at least to some extent. I think from this point on, we're always going to have some remote workers. So all this stuff is fantastic to keep in mind. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and I will hang on for anybody that still has questions. And I think we had one question is, yes, the slide decks will be available and the entire presentation is recorded. So that will go out too, but just not as fast. It takes a while to convert that and post it. All right, I'll give Sherry a chance if she's still on, and I was whipping through here to see if she was. I think she still is, to see if she's spotting anything I'm not. She's much more familiar with it. And I am not seeing any additional questions. And it could be that the questions are more detailed than what everybody thinks I'd be able to address right now, which is fine. So feel free to email me, and I'll answer as best I can. But otherwise, we'll go ahead and close it out. And again, thank you for attending. Don't hesitate to shoot me feedback. If there's anything I didn't hit especially and you'd like some information on, I will answer it if I possibly can. If not, I will point you in the right direction. So have a great week. Thank you.